developers don't care about security is a line that I've read many times. I'm like, let's not say that. Like, that's not true.
They don't have the bandwidth to effort to care about it.
Yeah, I mean, see, we all have limited bandwidths and we all have a pyramid of needs, right? Both personally and professionally. There's only so much that you can do. Like when it is not popping up in the top 3 or top 4, whatever the bandwidth that you have, like it easily falls off. We are taking the same APIs where we already said there are a lot of vulnerabilities. We already said we are not doing enough about the security of them, and you are wrapping them and building more powerful layers that exposes this data to even more faster and more performant and AI agents that are more capable. So it's bad for the security posture, it's bad for the end users data, but hopefully at least this forces people to take this more seriously. Don't leave security as an afterthought. Trying to force fit it later will never be as good as you actually initially thinking about it. Even the ROI also won't be there. So I would say it's time we actually bring in even some training.
Hey, welcome to the Scalekit Podcast. I'm Ravi, one of the co-founders of Scalekit. Scalekit is an identity and authentication infrastructure platform for B2B applications. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Buchi Reddy, founder and CEO of Levo.ai, an API security platform. Before starting Levo, Buchi led engineering teams at AppDynamics, DeSha, and also founding engineer at startups like Traceable.ai and Neptune.io. Over the years, he has worked across observability, runtime security, and large-scale distributed systems with a predominant focus on production-ready and secure architectures. Buchi, we're so excited to have you here.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, Buchi, let's get started. Before we talk about Levo and all that, I want to understand what is the journey that you went through before you decided to co-found Levo? And what exactly drew you specifically to the API security problem?
Just a brief intro about me. I started as an engineer, right? Originally from Hyderabad. I started my career building high-frequency trading systems. Good entry into distributed systems, and I understood the importance of scale and performance. But when I moved to the enterprise side after I joined AppDynamics, I started understanding the importance of security aspects as well. Because you're dealing with a lot of sensitive data, end users' data, and a lot of financial customers from BFSI sectors, and especially products like AppDynamics are literally sitting in the customer's application, so you can understand the sensitivity of the data and all. So I think that was my entry into understanding the importance of security. But I think a major milestone has happened when AppDynamics was acquired by Cisco. As we all know, Cisco is a gold standard for security. I mean, being a security company, at least I see it as one of the best companies, and the talent wise also. I still remember my conversations with some of the security people. They're pretty top notch. And after the acquisition, they were like, hey, AppDynamics, you're now Cisco and you better be meeting the standards of Cisco. And on top of it, there's real implications because Cisco is a global company and they have revenue in Europe region as well. And if you don't meet GDPR and all of that, the 4% of the overall revenue that is getting impacted. So it's not just for the sake of it, but there is tangible impact because of it. So Cisco security team started looking at how AppDynamics itself is actually building applications. It's several security aspects, all aspects, not just application, but where I was looped in is how the application security aspects of it. And that I would say was a big pivotal moment in my life because being an engineering leader, like many engineering leaders, we are focused on how fast we are innovating, how fast we are releasing features. Obviously, there is always competition, and customers are asking for brand new features. Deals are pending on big feature releases. But that opened new doors for me where they were asking questions which seemed very basic, but I didn't even have clue on why did we even not think about some of those things. But I learned a ton in that engagement, and I volunteered to be the first team that went under the security team's scrutiny after the acquisition. Learned a ton, and exactly around that time, after that, basically after spending a couple of years in Cisco and going through all of this journey, understanding so much about the impact of vulnerabilities, impact of insecure applications and ramifications of not protecting customers' data, that's when I actually got the opportunity to join Traceable as well. And after joining there, Traceable is an API security company, although they were focusing more on the runtime security aspects initially. And I think I got to experience that much more deeply. So combination of both of these is what I would attribute to as my thoughts about how I landed on Levo in general. And of course, I think there was one more angle. This is, I would say that's why like some of these thoughts don't come all at once, right? Several dots connected together. And Ravi, I don't
Yeah.
know if you still remember our conversations about authorization as a service.
Correct.
So in fact, Levo didn't come just like that together as an API security company or idea. While all of this was building up, when I realized the importance of access control and right parties getting access to the right data, and you and I were brainstorming about some of the authorization as a service concepts. So originally I actually wanted to start an authorization as a service company.
This is almost 5 years back.
Exactly. I mean, this is like right before starting Levo. We discussed, and I still remember the discussions. And I was also doing, I think parallelly, you were also thinking a lot about this problem, or in the IAM space in general, where you have spent, like, I guess, most of your life, most of professional life. So combination, I almost started authorization as a service as a company, but my Cisco experience, Traceable experience, and more importantly, the initial customer conversations when I was like trying to pitch them the authorization as a service, like every newbie founder, I was trying to force my solution on them. But like some customers were like, hey, you know what, like, authorization as a service is a great idea, but it is going to be very, very hard for me to go and rip the entire authorization layer and put yours. I think we paid attention to those conversations, and fortunately, me and my co-founder had good listening skills to listen to what they were saying. And then we understood key, a lot of API security thinking in the market has been about securing the production. So we are going and telling, hey, let's put a very tight access control layer so that you protect the data. But they were saying like, we have some layers already, and it's going to be very, very hard to put these complete new layers. The gap that we clearly saw is, okay, look, there are people who are trying to solve this problem, but they are coming from a web application firewall angle. And our thinking is correct, like maybe giving the best, most strongest access control and IAM system probably will solve most of the data access problems. But then the market was not conducive for it. That's when we spotted this gap where, yes, it is the same API security problem which needs to protect the data, but we got to do it proactively. And when we looked at it, it was complete white space. Like, there was like manual pen testing, but apart from that, if you actually see the life cycle of the API after you build it, with respect to what you do with the security posture of it, you're not doing much until you put it in production. That's the gap that we went after.
So, Buchi, there are two interesting threads that I picked up. You mentioned that you, as an engineer, yourself did not realize, hey, we did not have good fundamental security practices in place until the acquisition by the big company like Cisco. Right. Now, I want to understand, is it the same general thinking that you see amongst the engineering leaders that you talk to, where they are in the race of constantly building new features and new APIs and giving them to the customers, and they don't realize how much of the security effort that they need to put in to make sure that they are enterprise ready, their APIs are secure, their APIs have all sorts of logging and monitoring in place. So how do your conversations go with these engineering leaders?
Unfortunately, yes, it is still like almost same. It is getting better, and I'm an optimist, and I'm trying to change that as well. Like, I want to do my part in actually making it, changing it. To large extent, I still see a lot of these conversations, and I think it is probably because originally cybersecurity and all of this cybersecurity is a very young field, as we all know, because like attacks probably were not happening on the day one when we started building applications. They came in a little later, and it was seen as a cost center. Logically, you can say that, right? Because it's not generating new revenue. And because of these things, this function was kept outside engineering. And because of that, like if you go to an engineering leader, like if you're a CTO or if you're a SVP of engineering, is it one of the KPIs that you are putting? Like, I'm going, hey team, I'm gonna measure how secure our applications are, and that's one of the KPIs that you should meet. Like, I have never heard such conversations, at least in the past. And that's the reason me and other engineering leaders like myself are like little unaware of it. It's like it's not like they don't want to, and it's not like they don't know about, or they're not smart enough to understand it. Like some people misunderstand this, like, oh, they don't care about, developers don't care about security is a line that I've read many times. I'm like, let's not say that. Like that's not true.
They don't have the bandwidth to afford to care about it.
Yeah, I mean, see, we all have limited bandwidths and we all have a pyramid of needs, right?
Yeah.
Both personally and professionally. There's only so much that you can do. Like when it is not popping up in the top three or top four, whatever the bandwidth that you have, like it easily falls off. So it's not the intentions, it's not the lack of knowledge, it's mainly because it was just not prioritized. And unfortunately, I still see it because even in my own, like now, when I'm trying to work with customers, every time we come across a smaller customer, there is always this lingering thought key, like which camp this engineering leader or this small company leader belongs to. Quite often, we actually still see, even today also, we still see companies leaning towards like, not investing in this area.
So exactly, that's the other thread that I picked up in your earlier answer, where hey, the engineering teams are the ones that are building APIs as a way to offer their capabilities to their customers in a seamless fashion. And while we are saying that, hey, there is a different security team that is responsible for the security posture of the company itself. It can be APIs, it can be applications, it can be corporate, it can be network, all sorts of security, right? Let's say it's a CISO team. So how do these two teams coordinate internally to build the security posture and then identify what their current security standards are and where do they need to go? How does this happen? Usually, whose responsibility is it?
Yeah. You have hit on one of the key problems actually. This problem originates mainly because there is no standard answer for what you just asked. Like if you go and ask five companies, you probably might get at least three different variants of answers, because there's even, you can tell that based on the titles also. Like when we talk, like this is a constant problem we have on daily basis when we are actually planning our GTM also. Who do we target?
Yeah.
That's kind of answer to your question, right? Like whoever cares about the security of APIs, that's what we should target to. And when we actually are sitting down and trying to understand, there is, to large extent, the CISO team is caring about the security of the overall business. Now, when you break it down, that breaks down into network, servers, endpoints, applications, data, AI, right? Everything. And that's largely, that's how it was seen. But now if you go sector by sector, things like cloud could probably be done by a central team, because they are like fairly loosely coupled concepts. And there's a VM, like, maybe you can secure a VM without worrying too much about what you're running on it to some extent, right? Even of course that matters, but when it comes to an application, how can you secure an application without fully understanding what it is doing, what is the business logic in it? I would say that's where it went wrong. And you can make a perfect case for like, hey, application security should be a concern of engineering team, because they are the ones who are actually writing the code. They are the ones who are best positioned to really understand where the vulnerabilities are, to threat map and to understand. But then, like I said earlier, historically we have not made that as a priority for them. They are not fully educated on all the attacks that are happening, all the the threat landscape and all these things, and no bandwidth. So because of all of this, to large extent, what we see in the market is broadly it's under CISO's team. There is an application security team, and they are the ones who are thinking and caring about the applications and API security. But there is product security as a new concept and new teams that are emerging as well, who are encompassing not just the applications but the overall infrastructure and all these things. And also there is like engineering practices being built in the last few years. They are also thinking like engineers and trying to automate everything, infrastructure as code. Along with that, like even the security also, everything they are trying to automate and get it as early as possible in the software development life cycle. That's where exactly, of course, we started Levo to actually make API security fully automated in the software development life cycle. So that I still see that spectrum is pretty broad. There are still companies where like InfoSec team actually is caring about the complete application security also. So yeah, it's all over, and even the investments from the executive teams and even the board with respect to like whether you have a separate AppSec team, separate InfoSec team, and all this like varies from company to company. And to some extent, it's a very complex situation because it also depends on the nature of the business, right? You're a BFSI or you're dealing with a PII of end users, suddenly it becomes more important. Whereas you go and you're not dealing with all of that, you're dealing with only private data, or you're dealing with just numbers that nobody cares, then suddenly. So that's why it is a very It's a huge spectrum. It's part of the challenge, GTM challenge for a lot of cybersecurity companies also, in my opinion.
So, interestingly, the other question that I have is, you spoke about it's somehow traditionally a problem that CISO teams cared about. Engineering teams were responsible for building the APIs and making sure that there is some sort of an authentication or authorization for these APIs so that the APIs only can do certain things. But see, CISO teams are only there only when an organization grows big enough to have a formal CISO team, formal CIO team, and then create that. Until then, it's a responsibility of the engineering team itself, the whole architecture, security, everything. So, does this mean that API security is a problem only for large companies? Maybe someone who has 300 plus employees, who has a big enough engineering team and big enough CISO team to worry about? Or is it something that every company should worry about from day zero?
Yeah, you have summarized my the initial GTM learning that I had in the first 6 to 9 months of trying to sell Levo's product.
Okay.
Being an engineering leader, I thought like the second part of what you just said, which is like, hey, it should be an engineering concern. And I tried selling to smaller companies also because, as you know, both as a first-time founder and also as a startup, it's always a good idea to go after smaller companies so that you have much quicker deals, less sales cycle and all. But I learned the hard way that, like, it's very, very hard to find such people. I found few engineering leaders who are like really thinking through, and maybe they have seen the ramifications of like not caring about it somewhere, or maybe something else. But in cybersecurity, to large extent, there's compliance, there is regulations that are ultimately forcing it. Without that, like it's a typical exercise kind of analogy. Like there's only very, very disciplined people who are actually exercising without anybody telling them to exercise. Otherwise, a broad list of people are exercising when they don't feel healthy or like when the doctor tells them. Right? It's kind of like this. Again, I'm an optimist and I see some changes in some areas, but
I think it's a great analogy, Buchi. Everyone knows and agrees that exercising regularly is good for your health and you should do it, but then you don't do it unless something bad happens or something forces you to do it. Like you said,
yeah.
compliance could be a good trigger for API security, or some unfortunate incident could be a trigger for focusing on API security. I think it's a great analogy. I want to dig deeper to understand more about what is API security, right? The reason why I'm asking that is, if an engineering leader builds some sort of an authentication layer for their APIs that they're exposing to their customers, I think one of the common patterns that I see is they start with simple API key based authentication to the APIs and then say, hey, customers, if you want to use my APIs, you need to send this API key for all the requests, and only then I'll honor that. Is that enough? Is that not enough? What does API security mean? What are the different factors that come into API security?
Good question and very interesting topic. I loved chatting about this because there's a lot of misconceptions in this area, right? So if you break down like what happens when we are building and deploying an API and making it fully operational, right? And also look at the involved components. The business logic is written, like let's say you're using Java Spring Boot to, boot up your REST APIs. The actual business logic goes, first of all, there is like the actual API, the REST framework itself is involved. There is Spring Boot in this case I'm talking about. Likewise, there are dozens of languages. Your business logic actually ends up becoming few lines of code in the API implementation. Now, there is a Spring Boot and REST layer there. And on top of it, nobody puts their server directly exposed to the internet. So you're actually sometimes exposing them through API gateways, sometimes through load balancers. And then there is usually a web application firewall, sometimes even a CDN that is fronting all of this. In this whole thing, if you see, and of course, now the API key is one form of authentication. So there is like authentication mechanisms, how it is implemented, authorization mechanisms, how it is implemented. You see how the problem is growing pretty complex very quickly because there is like way too many moving parts, and the chances of somebody becoming a deep expert in all of this is actually very, very less. So people are like actually experts or like they are aware of like certain parts of this. But because even if you see the first party code also, the business logic is itself is just the first party code. And then there is like all these other components that are wired together to actually make it happen and deploy it at scale and make it available at scale. Now, in this entire thing, if you see, first of all, one, there could be complete configuration issues. It's like where it's not the design issue, it's designed correctly, but the configuration itself could be wrong. Like I've seen cases where they think it's completely JWT based authentication, but the enforcement is not even happening. And it's like
You
it's
mean
so
the
scary.
token validation?
Yes, the token is not even validated, or like the algorithm is not validated, or the expiry is not validated, right? So there is like just configuration of these things just because there are so many moving parts. And then in addition to that, like the business logic itself, at the end of the day, it's code, and code could have bugs, just like we test for functional things, and
Yeah.
it's the same. Like here, the bugs, if it is giving a wrong calculation, or like there's just functionality is wrong, then we call it as a functional bug. But what if it is prone to the functionality is correct, but it is prone to security attacks? Like I could confuse it, or I could inject certain things. Those are called security bugs. So there is like proper business logic bugs. So I think what you are saying is like a happy case, which is actually the problem. The happy case can be achieved very quickly. I can slap in one of the ready-made frameworks, and I can write 5 lines of business logic and get an API up and running and working, and then I can release it to the wild world. That is actually sometimes problematic to some extent. It is right, but the if you leave the happy case, if you have to be thorough.
I think it gives you a false sense of security that everything is working. You don't even know what is not there.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to understand this entire, all the moving parts, all the pieces in the puzzle, and where all things could go wrong. And that's where, like, now defining your question fundamentally, API security is broadly just saying, like, hey, all the crown jewels, all the data and transactions that you are doing is happening through APIs. Let's protect them. And by that we mean let's protect the transactions, let's protect the data actually. So data is what ultimately we are protecting, but there is also data security, which talks about even broader, like the data at rest, data in storage, and all that. Which is probably this is just my guess, like which is probably why, and the data security was there already for much longer than the API security. And other thing is like the problems are so broad, like API security tools don't solve that broader data security problem, so we cannot even call it. So then I think API security name came up because like you are specifically focused on this new attack vector that, like, when hackers figured out this complex puzzle, there are like so many moving pieces and people could easily get this wrong, or configurations could be wrong, or there are some clever hacks that I can do on the business logic to abuse and do fraudulent transactions or steal the data. That's when the API security has become popular. So that's exactly what we mean by, like, hey, all the modern applications are API based. Let's protect them, and that's the API security platforms.
So, in your experience, Buchi, predominantly are these APIs built by engineering teams to be offered to their customers, or is it predominantly for internal purposes?
Majority is internal. I actually introduce one more thing. Let's call it as external, right? So external, I break it down into two. External, when I say external, at least our definition is internet facing. And there's again misconception. Some people, so when they are internet facing for two reasons broadly, or
Yeah.
multiple, maybe more, but at least two major reasons. One is you're building your own web applications or mobile applications that are going to consume these APIs from internet. And the second one is you're exposing them to other developers or other partners to build on top of, like a headless API consumption. At least that's how we define. And the misconception that I'm talking about is a lot of people, unless they have like this developer facing APIs, they think that they don't have any external APIs. I even asked few people, like, do you have a mobile app or web app? And yeah, several. What do you mean by you don't have external APIs? Hackers are so clever that this is very easy for them to reverse engineer or understand what APIs you have, like just based on your web application. But to your point, majority of the world, lion's share of APIs are actually our internal APIs because of the service-oriented application architectures, microservices. They have exploded like crazy. So in terms of numbers, 90 plus percentage is actually internal facing. There is another misconception, or at least I would say lack of understanding to some extent. There are teams who think that, oh, I don't need to care about internal APIs, external is my top priority. Yes, I can see the logic, but we all have to understand that it is all simple software configuration that is keeping our security rules in today's clouds world. One, AWS security misconfiguration is what it takes, in dumb words, to make you butt naked. You mess up one security rule, and that is software again at the end of the day, right? All this
Yeah.
cloud, like we are actually exposing all these security rules. So that's another area where we are trying to educate. Like we got to take the internal APIs also seriously. There is lateral movement, there is social engineering, there is all kinds of ways people have figured out to get into your doors. So let's not act like they're not accessible. In fact, I actually
Yeah.
give you even bigger reason why we should care about internal APIs. Because of that mindset that these are all internal, everybody is rolling them out without even authentication in some cases, right? Like again, he's like, I might have written an internal API with no authentication at some point. Okay.
Yeah, it totally resonates. You think that, hey, this API cannot be used by anyone outside my network, whatever VPC, whatever you may want to call it, a shared network that you may have created. And then one attack vector somewhere in one of these VPCs, maybe someone tried to access an internal tool. Like you said, they may not have configured the appropriate security configs. And that's it. They can go through the entire network's API systems.
Yep, totally. It's like a lot of admin APIs are unauthenticated in some companies. Think about it, the more powerful admin APIs are unauthenticated.
Yeah, that's really crazy. So one of the things that I'm thinking about while you're talking about this API security, which is what sort of authentication schemes have you seen people adopting or using predominantly for their APIs, at least for the external APIs to their customers?
Yeah, I think external APIs, especially JWT tokens and API keys, that's like the top two that come to my mind. And API keys, we all know the dangers of API keys and all this, like, but it is still being used quite heavily.
Yeah.
I would say maybe because of the like ease of use, or maybe people have been doing it for a while and they're like, so used to it. But yes,
Yeah.
these are the top two that I see.
Yeah, this is one thing that's bothering me, Vuchi, because see, fundamentally, I think API keys are like passwords, right? They're not so very secure. It's very easy to lose them. The rotation is hard, and technically, anyone who has the API key can do anything with the data. I even wonder, is there a two-factor authentication for API keys? At least there is two-factor authentication for your passwords, right? So why do you still think that API keys are as prevalent today with all these known security issues, known observability issues, and known auditability issues with these API keys?
Like, I think when you guys started Scalekit, the first thing, when I heard about Scalekit from Satya or you was, it's like, what? Is there still space for authentication service today? This is like, guys, this is 2024 or 2025. It's like, that is the answer to your question. Like, I think even today also getting right authentication system correct is not trivial, and authentication authorization is still not seen as like that. Again, it's part of that enterprise readiness. As you know, right? Of course, authentication is like seen as even more basic, but even there also, as long as I have some form of authentication, like nobody is questioning me, like why this not that, right? Just I need to have authentication, and especially for APIs like developer consumption and all. So I think it's largely because it was just one of the easier ways to get it working, and people are used to it, and some of them are carried forward. Another thing that I noticed is it's very rare that I've seen very rarely people going and ripping some auth system to replace it. So one of the reasons is just because they have been there for like, several years, and nobody sees the ROI or sees a need to actually go and rip it. So I see these are the two primary reasons.
Yeah, basically what you're saying is it's very easy for me to roll out an API key based authentication to my APIs. And it's not like no one is forcing me to take a better or a safer or more complicated approach. So why should I? Maybe once an enterprise customer comes and says, hey, dude, I want OAuth based or some sort of a JOT token based API authentication. Maybe that's when the teams will start rolling out. Yeah, maybe it's that AppD Cisco story again for some of these companies.
Yeah, things will change only if that customer says like, no, I'm not going to consume your APIs if you are authenticating with API keys, right? But I've not heard anyone ever saying it, to be frank.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, do you think that that thought process changes with AI agents coming into picture? Do you think AI agents using APIs will force people to use more stronger forms of authentication mechanisms like OAuth because they need more auditability now? I want to know which agent is accessing my APIs. I just don't want to know if the agent can access the APIs.
Actually, the last point that you said is at the crux of it. The
Okay.
logical, or the founder of a cybersecurity company, an engineering leader, part of me wants to say yes, absolutely. But really, it's only going to happen is the last part of what you said, which is like you said they want to audit, they want to have that audit. Even the audit also they are going to maintain, or they are going to want it only when somebody forces it, and hopefully the regulators and auditors are going to force it. But if they force it, yes. But let me give a simpler version of answer, right? Logically, yes, because as a human, even as an API client, there is only so much that I'm consuming, and only so many ways I'm consuming the data and API calls. Whereas the AI and LLMs and all these new AI agents are way more powerful, and they can consume the data and different types of data in several other ways. The traditional API is not the only way this data is going to be consumed by the AI agents, right? Even MCP servers, they take it one notch up, because instead of calling one API, now you could be calling three different APIs to actually provide the data that the AI agent is asking. So all of this, it's more important than ever, and which is actually I'm personally very excited about this, because like whatever mission we started Levo with, it is like even more imminent and even more important today, and we are excited about it. We are actually already building things in that direction. But on the practical side, I think the auditors and regulators have to wake up, understand these ramifications, and enforce it.
Okay. Then you're saying practically it's not going to happen anytime soon.
No, no. Again, I'm an optimist. I'm genuinely an optimist, and I am also like very bullish on this whole get system getting better. I think there are other forcing factors. People will lose data. Like it's a companies will suffer data breaches and all. Part of the problem in this is when data breaches and all happen for right reasons, they don't disclose a lot of details, or at least they think the right reasons. I personally am starting to think that mentality has to change. Of course, you don't have to disclose a lot of details about your systems or expose more weaknesses. That is usually the concern. But I think we all have to be honest and share more open root cause analysis, more open all this, because that's actually one of the reasons today, like we have to try so hard in convincing some customers on why it is important. But that's just because they are not seeing enough data. But are people not losing the data because of API security breaches? It's like left and right. It's just that it's not published very widely, and that culture also has to change, in my opinion. That could be another forcing factor where like people genuinely realize.
Yeah, I think we need to closely follow the airline industry here. They're extremely transparent about every single incident, big or small, and they make all and every detail public so that everyone can learn
Yeah.
from that. It's not just about that airline or that flight or that company or that part. It's about the overall industry itself growing secure together. I think that's a great point, Buchi. I know you touched upon MCP, so I want us to go there. So one of the things that I was thinking is, hey, if MCP is becoming more and more popular and more companies are actually building MCP servers, if a new company is getting started today, do they even need to think about building APIs, or can they get away with just building MCP servers and then say, hey, your agents can talk to me via my MCP servers? How does that affect you or your roadmap? Like, will you now become an MCP security company?
We are. What is happening in the world right now? Everybody is slapping an MCP server on top of their APIs. MCP server is just an API wrapper today. It does not have to be. And if you are writing something from scratch, it does not have to be, because ultimately that layer's responsibility is to answer a question, right? And now it
Yeah.
can go to the data source and get the data. But because you already have so many APIs to get the data or get the answers that you are looking for, we are like building wrappers on top of it. But because that's how it is happening, it is actually, how does that impact? It is actually great. Actually, well, it's bad for industry. I'll tell you why. Because again, we are taking the same APIs where we already said there are a lot of vulnerabilities. We already said we are not doing enough about the security of them. And you are wrapping them and building more powerful layers that exposes this data to even more faster and more performant, and like, AI agents that are more capable. So it's
Mm.
bad for the security posture. It's bad for the end users' data. But hopefully, like at least this forces people to take this more seriously. And for us, it's good news for any API security provider, because it's an opportunity, market opportunity. It's an opportunity to help customers and maybe help the world to become a better place. So that's how I see it. But in the long term, does API disappear? Like I said, it depends on the implementation. But see, the distributed systems, what they told, like even, the famous, you might be aware, Jeff Bezos, He didn't say like everybody just go to the data source directly, right? He said like there's perfect reason why to slap in an API layer because that introduces that loose coupling. So I don't see API going anywhere because that is still one of the best known architectural patterns to actually build scalable and loosely coupled distributed systems. The short answer is maybe there are some public facing API driven use cases probably will be replaced by MCPs and AI agents. But the count of APIs or like API usage is not going anywhere.
Interesting. So there's a point that you made, which is, hey, because most of the MCP servers today are being built on top of the existing APIs, and because AI agents are the one that is using MCP servers independently to figure out what to do or which tool to call, how to use the data from the tool. So if there are fundamental weaknesses in the existing APIs that are going to be amplified that much more because of the AI agents independently acting on the MCP servers. Did
Yes.
I get
And
that right?
thanks for summarizing it better than me.
So, interesting, Buchi. You guys have built an MCP server recently and launched it. Why did you do that?
I didn't expect you to put me on the spot. So, okay. The main business use case is the reason why we built MCP servers. We wanted the API security posture data to be available to LLMs and AI agents. And there's a lot of power in it. One use case that I'll just give one use case that I'm very excited about is like our mission was always about enabling, including developers also in the whole API security game in general, application security in general, right? Like that's why whatever we build the entire tool also like developer first and developer friendly, and we give a lot of information to developers like API documentation and all this. And one use case that we built is actually in the cursor while I'm working on an API using our MCP server. I can get the posture of my APIs that I'm working on right now. I can get if there are any open vulnerabilities right now, and I can leverage the same cursor and code gen, AI code gen to fix the vulnerabilities. It's like I don't have to leave my IDE, and without leaving that, by leveraging Levo's MCP server, you can actually know the security posture, improve the security posture, automatically fix vulnerabilities. So security, productivity, and that is just one of the use cases. Like there are several use cases. So the business use cases, we are not very. I mean, we tried not to just drink the Kool-Aid or just join the buzzwords just like that. And MCP server we launched because we see very clear business use cases. And likewise, like we people like AppSec engineers can actually prioritize and leverage LLMs in actually that in prioritizing that. If you think about a traditional tool, I give you the vulnerability table, like you can sort based on some scores that I give, like, but you are relying on like whatever score I am telling. I can give you CVSS score, I can put 9, and you will be thinking forever on why 9, why not 8. But now you're not constrained. You can actually take these vulnerabilities and leverage LLMs. You can actually come up with your own prioritization algorithm and immediately focus on what is important for you and your organization and your team. So there are legit use cases. That's why we built it and released it.
The reason why I asked that question is not to put you on spot, but I know a lot of developers and companies building MCP servers. But one thing that I've observed is how do they take it to production and actually give it to their customers, right? So I actually want to learn from your experience of, hey, what is your experience, again, from the security point of view? How is your experience taking this MCP server to production? What sort of security challenges or security thought process that you went through while you're doing that? And how are your customers using it and how are your customers reacting to it? I just want to learn from how do you take an MCP server from your IDE to production that can be used by your customers?
I'd love to share it because I want a lot of developers. I mean, if they didn't already build it, like hopefully whatever we share will be useful for them. It was super easy to build a local MCP server. So I'm keeping it local. But like the moment you want to give it to a user, are you going to ask them to are you going to ask every
Yeah.
user to run this locally? Like, no, I mean, that's not going to scale, especially not in the enterprise world. I looked around, like even the biggest companies have released only local MCP servers. I'm like, guys,
Yeah.
what what are you doing? And then I understand the
Yeah.
reason. The initial MCP specification didn't even talk much about authentication, or like maybe kept it little vague. And
Yeah.
basically nobody figured out that authentication. And even we struggled with the same thing. I was blown away. And every minute I was actually thinking about the Scalekit and companies like Scalekit, right? That like, why there is such a big need for companies like this even in 2025. Because
Yeah.
I got my business logic ready in no time, and I wanted to make it enterprise ready, and I am struggling with the basic authentication itself right there. So it was a struggle, and Of course, you are better expert than me because you guys are following that more closely. So the MCP new specification has released the OAuth server and all this. And like we had to initially, we were also trying to hack up. Like, okay, are we gonna go full blown OAuth server and all that implementation? Like,
Yeah.
weighing in the cost benefit analysis, the time it takes, and all this. But like, no, I don't want to wait that long. I have to give it to customers much faster. Some customers were coming to us like, I want to use it right now, and we have actually given a local version because like initially we didn't have enough time to actually build it the right way. I'm like, okay, dear customer, I don't want to risk it, so you got to take this extra burden. Are you enthusiastic enough to try it out on your local machine? They raised a hand. I said like, yeah, I'll still take it, but I know now average customer is not gonna do it. So it was a
Yeah.
struggle to actually get that authentication, and we are still like, actually coincidentally even this morning we had team meeting discussing about this topic. So like we got one layer and we are still refining it. Like there's a big need for it, and I think you guys are in a great spot.
Thanks for saying that, Buchi. But more importantly, authentication is one piece. I understand that you're trying to put together something. Of course, you would start with STDIO and then say, hey, now the burden of security responsibility is on you. There is a local Node.js server running on your system that is actually talking to my API. So you make sure that you're not exposing your laptop to anyone. But beyond authentication, did you think about observability? How are your customers using it? I'm sure your customers would be using it beyond certain use cases that you'd have dreamed that they would be using it for. Any interesting insights into what sort of use cases did your MCP server unlock for your customers?
Yeah, it does. I think there are multiple things. First of all, this is yet another artifact that we are giving them. The traditional, like, the SAST and SE aspects of that artifact itself is one that we constantly keep hearing. Second thing is we are seeing MCP registry, enterprise level MCP registry as a thing. So one of our customers, like, they took and started running on their laptop, and then their central team actually flagged it and said, like, what are you doing? Like, this has to go through the registry. And then, like, now we are discussing about, like, okay, is this ready for that registry? And then I'm asking them, like, is it some, what registry is it? Do I have to do certain things specific to your registry and that registry and this registry? Like, do I have to make my MCP server ready for 10 different registries, or is there a standard? So that is another problem that we are facing. And to their side, like, every developer or every security person spinning up their own flavors of MCP servers on their laptops is definitely not scalable. So they got to have some central observability and all these things. So in fact, some customers came to us, and again, I'll take slight digression, right? Like if you see our API security platform, within that API observability is a big use case. And this is no different from it because like there we are tapping into traffic and we are trying to tell what APIs are active in your environment. And our customer came to us and said like, hey, can you actually help me understand what all MCP servers are being used in my network? I mean, like we are working with some of them to figure out like how that use case fits. So it's actually a wild west out there. There will be, I think we will land on some standards, some best practices, some good ways to use it like in a reasonable time. But right now, because there is a lot of experimentation that is going on, like some people are like too eager to try out things faster, and some people are in the skeptical boat. Like I also spoke to customers and I'm asking them like, they are like very stern. I'm like, I said no to every LLM in my company. I'm like, okay, that's a little extreme, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we like this has been an area where we have been spending a lot of time. I am trying to take note of and still trying to digest what is that final form of delivery of our MCP server. And now going one level deeper, even the authorization, the implementation of authorization and all, am I
Right.
going to keep it as a wrapper on my APIs, still relying on the access control layer that my APIs are implemented like, and MCP is only just mashing the data and doing this? Is it like another GraphQL? Actually, this is, I don't know if you remember like when GraphQL came. This is yet another exact GraphQL kind of moment. It's no different. When GraphQL came also, some people built it as a wrapper on top of APIs. Some people
Mm.
put it as a directly on top of databases, but then some of them suffered massive access control
Yeah,
kind of breaches and issues. This
yeah.
is yet another moment like that. I think eventually time will tell, and maybe we'll come up with some good architectural patterns. But right now we have a lot of open questions. I don't want to claim that we nailed it fully. We have given certain forms. In certain forms, we have given to our customers. We are focusing more on, to be very frank, I'm focusing more on business use cases. I let experts like you and the industry to drive on some of the authentication aspects and other architectural patterns.
No, totally makes sense. Totally makes sense, Buchi. Like you said, today it's a completely unknown territory of two things. One, what is possible, and then two is how do I create a robust enterprise grade, secure, a remote MCP server that can scale to all my customers' needs, but at the same time don't introduce any new vulnerabilities that I don't know of, right? So taking that cue, I know that we are in very, very early stages of what MCP can do. But how do you think this will impact the broader API security ecosystem or security ecosystem? The reason why I'm asking that is, see, until now, at least there are humans and developers that are using the APIs. So there is some thought process and logic. At least you can trust some of them to say they don't do anything intentionally bad, right? Unless they're white hackers, of course. But now the whole non-deterministic, unpredictable behavior of these AI agents, they figure out when to make what tool call, how to use the data that they get, how to format it, how to recursively make certain, how to resolve dependencies between tools themselves. So how do you think this whole massive adoption of MCP as a protocol will impact the overall API implementation, API security implementation, and API observability implementation, the space that you're in right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a massive innovation that, like, I think we should not downplay it. We should not slow down in innovating and understanding the use cases. Of course, we have to do it securely, but there's leaps and bounds of progress as is happening, and we should continue at that pace. Like, I mean, that's what humanity is about, right? It about progress, and we have to leverage this. Like, I mean, this is like a once in a centuries kind of moment, right? I'm like again, is like they come very rarely, at least, or at least once in decades. Maybe centuries is an overstatement, but I think we should continue experimenting and learning it while being careful. But one thing that I'm hoping it would change, I'm not fully confident, that's why I'm not stating that it will change, is the investments that need to go into defending and protecting and even proactively thinking about these systems should massively increase. And I hope it increases this time at least. People realize the ramifications. Because if you see when LLMs came, like, yes, there were a lot of business use cases, but even faster than that, we have actually seen hackers and bad actors leveraging LLMs to even attack as well.
Yeah.
Now, my question is like, did we actually invest so much in leveraging LLMs and AI in general to even defend the systems? There's, of course, a lot of companies have started, a lot of VC investment has flown in, but I still think it is low, and it is directly linked to how much enterprises are investing in securing their data, securing their applications, and the budgets for CISO and all of it. It's directly linked because the more demand is, obviously there is no scarcity of innovators, or at least more will come up. People will try to innovate. Uh, so I still see that as one of the problems, the mentality that I called out earlier, right? Like, security being a cost center, that has to completely go. And if there is any other time, I think this is the time that mentality has to change. Remember how AI agents, MCP servers, and all of these are going to consume and or even attack your network, your applications, your data, your cloud, and realize and increase the budget. And I think there has been discussions about CISO should get board seat as a seat at the board, right? And then CISO budgets and all these like. But even now, like it's a huge spectrum, but at least even the most cutting edge companies still are, I would say, still not allocating enough. But this probably could be a trigger for that. That is one change I'm hoping for. I'm not 100% sure if it happens. But as an engineer or developer, at the least, I would be forced to think about the corner cases and all of these things much better. Because, like, if
Yeah.
the same API, you take a very simple case, rate limiting. It's like
Yeah.
when there is no automated API calls coming, like I'm not forced to think about rate limiting. It is such a basic concept, right? But
Yeah.
whereas the moment you have some automation, you will be immediately, because you will fall flat. Like you would immediately see that your server is brought down immediately because of lack of
Yeah.
rate limiting. And now as an
Yeah.
engineer, I step up and add rate limiting. Extrapolate that to the AI agents and everything. At the fundamental level, I think engineers will be like focusing a lot more on authentication, authorization aspects. They will be forced to because it's now MCP and AI agents that are going to consume your APIs and data.
Very, very interesting. Puji, one last question. If you have to give one piece of advice to engineering leaders, architects, or CTOs who are thinking about building their APIs to expose to their customers? What is that one thing that you want them to take away from this conversation?
Don't leave security as an afterthought. Trying to force fit it later will never like be as good as you actually initially thinking about it. Even the ROI also won't be there. So I would say it's time we actually, bring in even some training and education and threat modeling concepts like, all of that. And maybe I would even go back, like in even academics also, like probably we need to increase the cybersecurity and all these subjects, even start teaching to the engineers also, all of this. I mean, that's the fundamental. I'm not saying just for the sake of API security, like the proactive security is need everywhere, and it has to be automated. That is the only way we can scale. It has to be
Yeah.
automated.
So engineering leaders should think about not just the business logic of their API servers, but also about security, authentication, authorization, rate limiting, everything that comes with the whole package of offering APIs to their customers. Thank you so much, Buchi.
Yeah.
It was great talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on to podcast and then sharing your learnings and then talking about the API security space and MCP security space.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, I learned as much as I enjoyed as much as you did, and learned. I always learn a great deal when I talk to you, Ravi. So thank you for the
Thank,
opportunity.
thanks, Buchi.